Hi everybody, my name is Wendy Xu. I am a Brooklyn-based comics artist, and currently I'm working on a graphic novel called Mooncakes. It comes out with Lion Forge Comics next year, and I'm going to draw the two main characters from Mooncakes, Nova and Tam. So Mooncakes is a project that goes back to 2015. Suzanne Walker, who's my creative partner, we were originally pitching this comic idea for like a short supernatural romance anthology, I think it was. I've had this idea for like a long time. I was like, I want to do a story about a witch and a werewolf. Suzanne wrote the characters, but she left the design up to me. I usually like gravitate towards characters with shorter hair, so I think for this main character, for Nova, I wanted to make her have longer hair, so she ended up having like long wavy hair. And then for her clothes, I was like really into like more girl fashion at the time, so she wears a lot of like long sweaters and like long skirts, just cozy autumnal stuff, because the tone of the book is like Halloween-y. For Tam, I just actually based Tam on like a good friend of mine who's a comedian, Jess Tom. Their work is really awesome. But like Jess has this really cool asymmetrical haircut, so I kind of just like took their haircut. Yeah, when I draw, I feel like always the heads are too big, so before I ink anything, I always have to go in and like resize their heads. I like Bristol and like Copics. I have like a bunch of supplies here. I really like Japanese brush pens, like Kuretake and Zig, this brand is called. So the pencil I'm sketching with is a 0.3. Usually people, I think 0.3 is like less common than like 0.5 or 0.7, but I really like the delicacy of the lines that it produces. Sometimes I'll listen to music. I have like a couple playlists that I cycle through. They have like really weird names. Like one of them is called like sad music to make high school themed comics too. Because if I put a movie on, I'll just watch the movie. Unless it's a movie I've seen a million times before. Like if I ever, like I could always draw to Studio Ghibli because I've seen those movies like 1,000 times and I still love them. Hayao Miyazaki's been like such a huge influence on my work. I just love the way that I just love how his stories are they're so like sincere, because like he's not afraid to like run with like a really wild concept. He's like very, and it always works in his films. I love all the world building he does. I don't know, like the fat yellow birds that are going to the bathhouse in Spirited Away. Those are some of my favorite creatures that he's designed. And like, I have all the art books. He puts so much love into like the worlds that he creates, and like that's something that I always kind of get inspired by and I hope to emulate in my art. I never actually read a lot of Western comics growing up. I was totally into like Clamp manga, and also like the fashion is always stunning. And I think like fashion is, and like taking into account like what a character wears, like that's super important to me. So I always try to keep in mind like what would a character's fashion style be like. So Mooncakes, it's about a witch and a werewolf, and it's like a little paranormal romance. I think I've had this idea since like probably 8th grade. My friend loaned me this really terrible trashy romance novel. It was like very secretive, and she was like, don't tell anybody. It was like a very kind of, you know, not appropriate for 8th grade romance between a witch and a werewolf. And like, he was like a hot, broody forest ranger, and she was like a botanist. But the dynamic of these two supernatural beings have always kind of stayed with me. So that's why I was like, I really want to do a story with a witch and a werewolf. That would be super cool. Suzanne actually had like one piece of input for the character design. The character of Nova is she's hard of hearing, and so like I gave her hearing aids. But normally, actually, like hearing aids are much smaller than the ones that I draw her with. But you know, because it's a cartoon, I kind of have to make them a little bigger so that they're visible. I realized I'm much more of like a sequential artist than I am an illustrator, because like I can never think of like a concept that like, you know, the composition looks nice, this and that, whenever I have to do an illustration. But like whenever there's like a sequence, whenever there's panels, I'm always like, oh, okay, you know, I have to like do it like this and like this. Like my thinking is always in panels. Like every time I sit down to try to write prose, I always, because my day job is in publishing, I always want to write prose, but then I always end up thinking in panels. And I always end up scrapping whatever, like, prose story idea, because I'm always like, oh, this would be better as a comic. So when I'm inking, I'm also, like, doing, like, minor corrections. Like, when I'm penciling, everything is basically laid out. But when I'm inking, I, like, add little things. I teach comics and creative writing on Thursdays to high school students through the Asian American Writers Workshop. And it's really funny because everybody has such good ideas, but like the holdback is always like, oh, I'm afraid that like, you know, this idea sucks, or that like it's not good, it's not original. And I always tell them, like, you know, who cares, just do it. I always kind of feel like Steve Buscemi in that gif where he's like, how do you do, fellow kids? I told them, like, to just be like that Shia LaBeouf gif, you know, where he's like, just do it, just do it. The first time I wrote a novel, I co-wrote a novel, I was 15 years old. That was a super fun experience, that was a learning experience. And the first time I did an entire comic by myself, like a short comic, I was 17, and that was also like, you know, it wasn't like, you know, it was like manga style, like I wanted to be Clamp, because Clamp had like a huge influence on me, so I used like, you know, lots of like flowers and weird chibis and transitions and stuff, but that was also like a whole learning experience. I mostly taught myself from like looking at manga. I would hole myself up in the library after school, like with my friends, sometimes by myself too. I would just like read all the manga that they had. I would kind of like absorb the spreads. Like I read the same manga over and over and over again. I must have read Wish by Clamp like a million times. I read Chobits like a million times. But I looked at those spreads, like they're so kind of cinematic, and I learned, so I kind of tried to emulate that. My high school arts classes, because I did AP art, they were all very kind of fine arts focused. But I learned there because like I was like reading in terms of prose, like I was reading Amy Tan at the time, so I tried to like do like all the concepts for my AP senior art portfolio were based on like all these weird concepts I had about like, you know, Asian American identity. I think after high school I realized like, it's like, oh, I'm not good at fine art. Like it always felt so, like whenever I did those projects, like, this always feels so kind of hackneyed to me. I'm much better expressing it by like trying to be funny about it, or I think like there's something really special in when you're doing comics, that kind of sequential storytelling that lets you express yourself. So after I ink and like make some minor corrections, I think the head is still too big, but whatever. So I just erase. And then If the eraser picks up like some of the ink, I'll just go back and like kind of redo it. So now that I finished kind of like touching up the inks, I go into shading. It's weird because sometimes when you're drawing like a comic page, like like if the directions are like, and then like this huge magic thing happens, there's like an explosion and blah blah blah, and I'm like, okay, cool, and I can like kind of sketch that out really fast, but like I'll spend like a really long time trying to get like a perfect expression when they're doing a close-up on a character's face and they're saying something. I mean, I grew up in Connecticut, so we're pretty close to Massachusetts. I was never really into like the Salem witch trials or whatever, but like you definitely learned that kind of history growing up. But it always kind of interested me, and I grew up with a lot of witch books. I grew up on like The Worst Witch by Joel Murphy, and you know, obviously Harry Potter, which I was like so amazed by as a third grader. But you know, I didn't realize until I left that that area of New England has so many ghost stories, so many witch stories. It's really great. Suzanne does most of the writing, and she usually kind of has an instinct of, you know, whatever I like to draw. Like, we work really well off each other. It's really awesome. We started kind of informally collaborating when I illustrated some fanfic she wrote, like, back in college. But then, like, that's when we realized we work really great together. We should, like, do a comic someday, and now we're doing a comic.